It was taught to senior military officers at a base in the state of Virginia. This particular course was obtained exclusively by Al-Jazeera. Meanwhile, the U.S. military is conducting a review of all material taught to its officers. That's after the website Wired.com exposed another course teaching anti-Islam material. One of the slides presented by Army Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Dooley says the model he's presenting presumes that the Geneva Conventions are, quote, no longer relevant when fighting Muslims. It goes on to say that historical precedents of Dresden, Tokyo, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are applicable to Mecca and Medina's destruction. Dooley has since been suspended, but still holds his position at the college where this material was taught. Now, both the courses obtained by Al Jazeera and Wired.com were voluntary courses, and it's not clear if similar material has been taught in other military colleges. Josh Rushing has more.
Al Jazeera has obtained exclusive documents from the U.S. military. This is a course taught at a base not far from Washington, D.C. to senior officers. The name of the course is called Understanding the Threat to America. Across the first slide, there's actually a banner, and they call it the Outlawed Brief. What we don't have is what the presenter actually said about the course. We just have all of his slides. So it's hard to say exactly what that meant, but one is left to wonder why they called it the Outlaw Brief. The basic thrust of the course is that the United States has been infiltrated by the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas at the highest levels. It actually implicates dozens of mainstream advocacy groups for Islamic issues in the U.S., to include the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, and it says point blank that they are Hamas. It goes on to say that the infiltration goes up to the media. This is Bill O'Reilly, who hosts a popular show in the U.S. on Fox News, interviewing Ibrahim, who's a spokesperson for CAIR in Washington, D.C. They implied that education is controlled now by Muslim infiltrators, and even at the highest levels of the government. This is the executive director of CAIR, Nihad Awad, standing next to former President George W. Bush. His face is circled, and above it says Hamas. So there'll be no question left for the students in this class of his association. This is actually signed off by 2 retired 3-star generals from the U.S. Army, as well as the former director of the CIA, R. James Woolsey. I received this from a military officer who was a student at that school. He was concerned that this was being taught and even implied that it was doctrine. So he emailed it to me. Here's what he had to say.
This bigoted conspiracy cabal was both disgusting and so deeply un-American at its core. Those who propagate these materials and those who empower the ones who develop them should be ashamed. Anyone who understands anything at all about the current state of our national security should know that this sort of unhinged fear-mongering only serves to unnecessarily scare the American public into believing in an Islamic boogeyman, and provide ammunition to our detractors that America has lost its footing in the reasonable accommodation of religious freedoms as guaranteed under the First Amendment of our Constitution.
The senior general in the U.S. military, Martin Dempsey, has announced that they're reviewing all military training for this kind of material. They're focusing on the course that was uncovered by Wired.com. We've seen that course, and now we have this course. We're able to trace the source material for both courses back to a military contractor in the Washington, D.C. area called Strategic Engagement. And now that Al Jazeera has uncovered a second course with this type of material, one is left to wonder how many more are out there.
So how widespread is the use of anti-Islamic material in the U.S. military, and is the government doing enough to put an end to its use? To discuss this, we're joined by CAIR's National Communications Director, Ibrahim, as well as by Morris Davis, the retired Air Force colonel who served as chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay between 2005 and 2007, and Al Jazeera's Josh Rushing, whom we just heard from. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Josh, let me start with you. You had exclusive access to some of this material, and we heard some of what is in it. What else is there in it?
Well, it's literally hundreds of slides. It's hard to make the correlation and know how the presenter connected all of them, but there's clearly a correlation between Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and ultimately al-Qaeda. In fact, they have one slide in here. It's too gruesome to show on TV, but it shows photos of beheadings and has Muslim Brotherhood at the top of it. So using this kind of fear-based techniques, and also using a technique of just so much information that if you were a student, you must have been overwhelmed and thinking, my gosh, this must be true. When, anyone who knows this stuff is like, well, none of this is connected. There's no real correlation to this group or that group. But their real thrust is that all of these groups, there's literally dozens of Islamic groups in America, and they connect them all to Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood and say that it's a kind of a singular plan to infiltrate the U.S. at the highest levels.
That's one of their key tactics. We've seen that over the years, is this whole Kevin Bacon game of 6 degrees of separation between any Muslim anywhere in the world and al-Qaeda. I mean, that's how they play the game.
Right.
And they're constantly promoting these links. If you go to some of these groups' websites, they always have these charts with all the interconnections and all this. It's utter nonsense, but if you don't know what you're talking about or you don't know the real situation, it makes sense.
Okay, before we move on, Josh, has there been any response from the Pentagon to what you've seen?
Indeed, and it's worth noting that the reason Wired.com has the course that they have, taught by Lieutenant Colonel Dooley, and the reason that I have this course, The Threat to America, Understanding the Threat to America, is because military officers at both institutions brought these courses forward. So it is I think it should be noted that you can't paint the military monolithically on this.
Yeah.
It is not one voice, that these are actors within the military trying to push this information, but other officers are saying, wait a second, that runs against our core values. I was out at the Pentagon today. I spoke to their lead spokesperson, and here's what he had to say.
In all of our learning institutions, we want students to get a wide array of views and perspectives. We want the instruction to challenge them and to challenge some of their thinking. That's all healthy, but it needs to be balanced, and it certainly needs to be in keeping with our core values as an institution. The material that was presented to us as a matter of concern by this young officer student certainly is not in keeping with our values as an institution, and more importantly, not even in keeping with the strategy as we see it in the war on terror.
Okay, that's the Pentagon spokesman talking there. Let's go to Colonel Davis. Colonel Davis, we heard there from the Pentagon spokesman, and what he says seems to be very different from what is contained in these manuals that are being used in some of these staff colleges and educational institutions by the military. How did this stuff get in there?
Well, obviously there's a percentage of people that share that view. I mean, I've heard it before when I was in the military and in government, that the philosophy that only good Muslim is a dead Muslim, and it's it's not an insignificant number of people that have that attitude. And so it's unfortunate that in 2012 we still have that kind of thing that exists, but unfortunately it does. I'd commend General Dempsey. I think he acted quickly on this, and it'll be investigated and hopefully rooted out. But I'm afraid Lieutenant Colonel Dooley is probably the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to use that exact phrase. This is the tip of the iceberg. We have been seeing this same kind of thing for years. We've been reporting Islamophobic training with the FBI, with DHS, with TSA, the CIA, all of these important institutions. It's all happening under the radar. There's a cottage industry of these Muslim bashers who are training law enforcement personnel, military personnel, counterterrorism personnel, and you're breeding a generation of leaders in our society who have this suspicion of Islam and hostility towards American Muslims and Muslims in general.
What do you believe is the intention of a course like this? Actually, you mentioned in that course that Josh was talking about.
Yeah. The intention, obviously, of these trainers is to demonize Islam and to marginalize American Muslims. We see it time and time again with the whole everybody is linked to everybody else. Somebody met your great Aunt Tilly in 1902 and she said something wrong, so therefore you're associated. I mean, it's all utter nonsense. But as I said, if you don't know the real situation, it can make sense. And you have people who attend these courses, don't hear an opposing view, and just take this forward in their career. But again, thanks to all these individuals. When we hear about a course like that, and we've reported many of these over the years, when we hear about it, it's always from that individual or a few people in the course who went, wait a minute, this just doesn't smell right. When you say that all Muslims should be treated with suspicion, when you say that Islam is inherently evil, and in this case that Mecca and Medina should be wiped off the map, that just isn't American. It isn't productive. It's going to harm our security. It's going to harm our nation's interests and image for years to come. And it's got to stop.
And it sows division, right?
Oh, exactly. It creates divisions within our society. It creates divisions between America and the Muslim world. and it's absolutely unnecessary.
Right. Josh, in your report you mentioned a group that was ostensibly behind this, the source material for this, called Security Engagement. What do we know about that group?
Small group has 3 principals. It's located in the Washington, D.C. area. The 3 principals are Stephen Coughlin, that's who's behind the course that Wired.com made public. John Guandolo, who's mentioned in this, he is a former FBI agent and former U.S. Marine, according to his bio. And E.J. Kimball is the 3rd principal, a former staffer from the Hill, worked in Congress. I pulled the documents on the group. They're listed as a charitable organization, so they don't have to pay taxes to the U.S. government. The high irony in that is that they're listed as a educational group for cultural awareness, is how they get around the paying taxes. But they have to list who's on the board when they're that kind of organization. And on the board is listed as Frank Gaffney, who runs the Center for American Security Policy. Gaffney is behind a number of the anti-Islamic movements in the U.S., everything from he'll be connected to the anti-Sharia laws that are being passed from state to state, to there was a big controversy a year or so ago where they were going to build a mosque near Ground Zero, and what happened
he
there?
appeared as a key witness saying you shouldn't have to give Muslims rights under the Constitution. We shouldn't have mosques in America. It was absolutely amazing.
What's interesting is once you start connecting all these dots, you're talking about training that's happening with the New York police and the Ohio police and the CIA and the FBI and the military at this school and the military at that school. There are these strings that all seem to go back to a very, very small group of individuals. I mean, less than 10 people seem to be at the core of this plan, and they have a disproportionately large voice on this issue.
Okay, well, as you also mentioned earlier, Josh, on Thursday, the General of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff spoke about the material that was obtained by Wired.com. That's General Martin Dempsey. Let's listen to what he had to say.
It's totally objectionable. And so we are looking at how that course was approved, what motivated the individual to adopt that. It was an elective, but what motivated that elective for being part of the curriculum. And we are looking across the institutions that provide our professional military education now to make sure there's nothing like that out there. It was just totally objectionable, against our values. And it wasn't academically sound. This wasn't about, pushing back on liberal thought. This was just objectionable, academically irresponsible.
Okay, General Martin Dempsey there. Let's go back to Colonel Davis. Colonel Davis, how concerned are the military top brass about what is happening at the lower levels? And as Ibrahim Hooper pointed out, this must be seen as being counterproductive.
Well, it is counterproductive, and it's disturbing to me. If you look at the materials, it said that this may be a circumstance where we have to put the Geneva Convention aside and go to total war, using the example of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where we killed 250,000 men, women, and children, and proposing we do the same thing in some of the holy sites for Islam. The Geneva Convention has always been our bedrock document for the military. So for a military instructor to stand up in a professional military education course and say we're going to put it aside and go to total war is just astounding.
And what do you make of the fact that General Dempsey has also called for a pretty extensive review of what is being taught at these colleges?
Well, again, I commend him. He acted quickly. He made a very firm statement condemning what was taking place. So I think he's doing the right thing to try to prevent this from happening again going forward. But the school at Norfolk, the Joint Forces School, is just one of many DoD schools. So the curriculum at each one, I think we need to take a look and make sure that this isn't going on in other places.
And we've seen that in the past, too, when we bring it to the attention of the authorities, whether it's the FBI, whether it's the military, DHS, they usually react well. They take it seriously and say, this shouldn't have happened. But it shouldn't have happened in the first place. There needs to be a complete overhaul of the training at all levels, from the state to the federal level, on Islam and Muslims, because we're having a really negative impact on America's future and on the future of American Muslims who are impacted. When we, as an American Muslim, we go to an airport, we just saw within the last couple of days a Muslim toddler was placed on the no-fly list and taken off a flight in Florida. toddler from New Jersey. So these things can have a really negative impact on the lives of ordinary people.
But yeah, I think